Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV covers through satellite Galaxy 19, the whole United States of America, east to west, north to south, as well as what is in north, all Canada, and what is in south, all Mexico. We also stream on OTT platforms, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and you can download our app, Muslim Network TV app on your cell phones and watch through that. Our website is muslimnetwork.tv. So Biden seems to be finally moving forward, thanks to some administration relenting without giving in or conceding any elections, and he is nominating people left and right. His Situation Room team is already ready, and we will be talking about that. President Obama somewhere says that Biden was the least hawkish. More people think he was centrist. Some think, okay, normalcy is restored. What is normalcy? Is it that deep state what President Trump used to talk about? It's the centrist policy. What does that mean? Who is welcoming him? Who is afraid of him? Is he going to war? That is my primary concern. Because Muslim Network TV, of course, as a host, I'm a Muslim, although we have all neighbors of other faith talking with us and working with us. But wars have devastated a substantial part of the Muslim world. 7 countries have been destroyed, more or less 4 million people, according to studies, have died in war on terror. So is war terror going to continue like war on drug, never ending, or will supply some drugs to the war on terror so it can calm down and relax a little? So what is future? And to discuss that, we have a very good team, thinking people who know how to question also. And we have Dr. Stephen Zunes. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Great to be with you.
Okay. Dr. Stephen Zunes is Professor of Politics and International Studies at the University of San Francisco, where he serves as coordinator of the program on the Middle Eastern study. We also have Danny Sjursen. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you. He's a retired U.S. Army officer and a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. We also have Kevin Gosztola. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin is the closest to us, just from the state of Indiana, while we are in Chicago here. He's a documentary filmmaker and produces and co-hosts the weekly podcast Unauthorized Disclosures. Well, folks, thank you so much for being with us. It is little early, some time before Biden takes office, but his appointments are all around. Considering Senator Biden voted against the first invasion of Iraq, but then he voted for the second invasion of Iraq. First one, some people say succeeded, while destabilizing the whole region. And second one, we are still somewhat engaged in there. And he reportedly opposed the invasion of Pakistan to kill bin Laden. So do you think he might be restrained somewhat to go to war, or too early to say, or he's going to be a warmonger?
I find it rather...
Even if you can start responding, anyone can jump in to add or something.
I find it rather striking that Biden supported the Gulf War in 1991, but opposed the invasion of Iraq 11 years later. There are a lot of us who oppose.
No, I thought it was the other way around. He opposed the first one.
He opposed the Gulf War and supported the invasion.
Yes.
It's surprising in a lot of ways, because there were certainly those of us who opposed both wars. There are those who supported both wars, and there were a lot of people who supported the Gulf War because it was a response to a clear-cut act of aggression. It was authorized by the UN Security Council. It was pretty clear we'd win a decisive victory, where, of course, the invasion of Iraq was none of those things. So all three of those other three combinations all make sense logically, but Biden's position, it doesn't make sense. It's really hard to figure how you would support, though you would oppose the Gulf War and then support the invasion. I think this is maybe indicative that he is less of an ideologue, but someone who tends to bend with the political winds. And indeed, throughout his career, he's kind of leaned left, he's leaned right. A lot of us can't forgive him for his role in making the Iraq War possible. The Democrats controlled the Senate at the time. They could have stopped it, and they could have voted down the authorization of the use of military force. But Biden, who was then chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, pushed it really hard. He only allowed for a day and a half of hearings on this, the most important foreign policy decision of a generation, and he stacked the witness list with supporters of the war, ignoring a former UN inspector who would have testified that Iraq had achieved at least qualitative disarmament, and refused to bring in the countless number of Mideast scholars, 90% of whom would have said that invading Iraq would be a very bad idea. So there's a lot of bitterness many of us have over Biden for his role in making the Iraq War possible. But then again, as you noted, within the Obama administration, he was one of the less interventionists of Obama's inner circle, often challenging Secretary of State Clinton and Secretary of Defense Gates on a number of issues. So it's hard to tell. I think a lot of it comes down to what the American people will allow Biden to get away with.
Or is it by age he's getting wiser?
I certainly hope so. Some of his actions in the past, especially around Iraq, were pretty reckless.
Well, let's ask the youngest among us, Kevin, what he thinks about that. Wisdom through age?
Oh, I don't know about that. I believe, I'm paraphrasing, but the former Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, made the point that Joe Biden has been on the wrong side of almost every single foreign policy disaster, in the sense that he had supported these things that had turned out to be what most of the establishment would characterize as blunders. However, I do note that he was extremely reluctant, if not opposed, to the intervention in Libya, the war in Libya. And we'll get to Tony Blinken, but it's kind of incredible that Tony Blinken would be brought on, because he was a vehement supporter of that invasion that has totally destroyed that country. He's somebody who has allowed and backed the prolonging of the war in Afghanistan. It's clear to me that he embraces the drone program and what became a kind of targeted assassination policy of the Obama administration. So I think, I'd wrap my comments here so we can continue on with our discussion by saying that my assessment of Biden is hugely determined by the people in which he's surrounding himself. When you look at the figures who he's invited on, I mean, yes, he did say that he would like to end, and he put this on his campaign website, that he would like to end the war in Yemen that has been brutally waged by Saudi Arabia, and he'd like to end the U.S. military support for it. But you just take that issue alone, and we've talked about the political winds and how he moves with them. We've seen unprecedented expansion of bipartisan support in the Senate for ending U.S. military support for this brutality. And so I think it's a sign that we're going to need to focus on the people who he associates himself with, who are welcomed into his cabinet. And that's going to be a key indicator of the way forward for U.S. foreign policy.
So what do you think, Danny, about that? Do you have any read on Biden?
Biden has always been a bit of a combination of enigma and inconsistency. When I was teaching on the West Point faculty, one of my friends and office mates said that he was going to write a book someday called Biden on War. And he said it would be the most muddled book of all time. it seems as though Biden's career on foreign policy, which has kind of been one of his babies, right? He's been in the Foreign Relations Committee, he's chaired it.
Twice he was chair of that.
That's right. And he's been kind of a combination of, that inconsistency, but also that reflex, the political instincts. This is not a man particularly known for his nuance or his intellectual curiosity. He is a bit of a gut player, self-styled, in that sense, not very different from the description Bush gives of himself. So he learns lessons, though, because that Gulf War vote, when most of the Democrats, including like John Kerry and such, a lot of the Democrats went against that war, right? Would not support the 90 to 91 war. But the lesson that the Democrats took from that seems to have been voting against war is not a great thing, especially if it turns out well. There was a lot of speculation that guys like Bob Kerry, who lost a leg in Vietnam as a Navy SEAL, were thought of as potential presidential, contenders in 92. And folks who voted against the Gulf War paid a political price, And so when 2002 and 3 comes around, he very much learned that lesson. And so he becomes not just a collaborator in that war, but the cheerleader, as the professor noted, which I think was very important and really can't be forgotten or particularly forgiven. So, I take that role very personally, but then we have to be fair to the guy and say these insider reports, these Woodward style reports, giving us a glimpse into the administration, show me that while I happen to be in both surges, one drummed up and collaborated on by Bush, Biden and Bush, and then the next one was an Obama surge in Afghanistan. And I had the displeasure of being part of both, but it does seem from the reporting that Biden was less enthusiastic about that one and told Ambassador Holbrooke and wrote it down. Holbrooke wrote it in his diary, like, it's not going to work. We're not going to bring democracy and human rights. It's just, I'm not sending my son over there, and all this. So that shows me the gut play and that he learned a new lesson, which is that large style surges and Iraq invasions are a bad idea. So I think that tells us something about what we might see, which is low intensity, long-term warfare, but probably not another massive Iraq invasion.
So do you agree with Danny that he may be just a person who could easily be persuaded by people he is surrounding himself with? Okay, so that seems to be my question. What do you think, Professor Zunes, about Danny's thought that he may...
Yeah, I would, I'm sorry, I didn't know that question was directed to me. Yes, I think that may have something to do with it. And I think also this is a personal story about his son, Beau Biden. I mean, of the 535 members of Congress, the majority of whom did support the Iraq invasion, Biden was the only one to have a child who served in Iraq. And his son, who was actually the Attorney General of the state of Delaware at the time, happened to be in the National Guard Reserve, and the Delaware National Guard Reserves got shipped off to Iraq, and he died tragically of its rare form of brain cancer that is often caused by iodized radiation. And Biden believes that his son may have picked that up from one of the burn pits that the U.S. military did with certain weapons that were used, armor-piercing shells that have this radioactive component to it. And so he's become, because of that personal loss, I think he's become much more reticent about sending American troops into combat. Now, that doesn't mean he won't oppose certain high-tech measures that might kill a lot of other people, but I think as Danny pointed out, I think he'd be less inclined to get us into another full-scale war.
Well, that's good to know. There is a level of comfort there. Do we have an agreement, Danny and Kevin, that he may not start a full-fledged war at least?
Yeah, I'm willing to support that. Yeah, I just don't think there's a political support even in any party for the kind of invasion we saw with Iraq in the 2000s.
Yeah, I underscore that actually. In terms of public opinion about war, there's not just the anti-war wing of the Democratic Party, which has usually come from the left, has grown, but even within the Republican Party, there's a growing kind of libertarian isolationist view that is also very skeptical of intervention. So whoever's president, I think it'd be far more difficult to get away with an Iraq-style invasion at this point.
So, Danny, are you willing to join this chorus that there is not less chance of a major war?
I think less chance of a major war that kills a whole bunch of Americans. I agree with Stephen on that point. Sanctions and special forces raids and drone warfare and, helping to catalyze ethno-sectarian wars and turning the tribal into sort of an anti-Islamist or, feigning that it's that. I think he's capable of all of those things, but because of the personal factor with his son, the gut play, and public opinion polls. I mean, this is a weird moment. I don't like to always speak from the position of a veteran, right? I like to try to transcend that. But here's what I do know. There is very little precedent in American history, if any, for 73% of the veterans of a war like Afghanistan, conservative polling being for full withdrawal, which is a higher rate than the civilian population. I mean, you'd have to go back to the very end of the Vietnam War, 72 to 73, to even find something close. And I don't know that you'd find it among the veterans. This is sort of a remarkable thing. What I am worried about, and I know we're going to pivot there in a bit, is that the people he's surrounding himself with, for my sins, I read everything they write. I go to Foreign Affairs and read 2,000 words from Jake Sullivan and Michelle Flournoy. I know she hasn't been officially appointed yet, and Blinken. Interestingly, these folks are a little bit more fast and loose in their play on interventionism, not necessarily regime change operations with 150,000 American soldiers, but I would suspect that they would be more in the blob, as some people, especially on the libertarian right, call it, the foreign policy establishment that's willing to continue this exceptionalist notion of forward expeditionary basing and low-level, for us, low-level and low-intensity violence. So it's going to be an interesting thing where Biden, within his own administration, might play the same role he played as vice president as sort of the more restraining voice among a group of rather more hawkish folks. That's also rather remarkable and disturbing.
Well, that's very interesting direction which we are taking. Let's talk about this low intensity and drone and these things as we take this short break. You're watching Muslim Network TV, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. Before we get into, so it is good that we don't expect a major war because there's a position here, the weakness as a country, there are a whole lot of things which are happening, and we're trying to come out as a good guy. We're willing to work with everybody out there and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about the low intensity risk of the continuing, warfare and low smearing war, which has a lot of misery for people who are involved in there. But before that, let's talk about who is in the Situation Room. What anyone of you has any take on Mr. Blinken? I mean, it is said that he was the one who persuaded somehow Biden in support of the second invasion of Iraq.
Well, Blinken is a rather disturbing choice, in my view, because of his hawkish views, certainly around Iraq. As mentioned earlier, unlike Biden, he supported the intervention in Libya's civil war, which compounded the damage. I am also very disturbed at his strongly ideological perspective of supporting the Israeli occupation. He's been one of those who has long pushed this idea that, supported also by Biden himself, that the billions of dollars of U.S. aid to Israel should be unconditional on any Israeli behavior, no matter how egregious the violations of human rights or international humanitarian law. He has blamed the Palestinians for the breakdown of the peace process, even though the Palestinians have pretty much agreed to everything that John Kerry put forward in the last peace offensive back in 2015. The one positive thing about him is I think he has been less inclined to give a blank check to the various Arab dictators. Biden seemed to be actually backing Mubarak up to the final hours of his presidency in Egypt, whereas Blinken, I think, has been much more prone to question both on moral reasons, but also in terms of the longer term strategic interest, what the U.S. gains from supporting autocrats. And the other plus for him, of course, is that he is an internationalist. He's had a lot of experience. He will undo a lot of the damage done to the State Department by Rex Tillerson and Mike Pompeo, who did enormous damage both internally, within the State Department itself and the diplomatic corps, but also, of course, our relations with traditional Democratic allies. So he'll do some good there. But overall, again, his hawkishness is quite disturbing, especially when the State Department, being focused on diplomacy, should be the wing of the government that is less prone to supporting militarism and intervention.
Kevin, do you have any idea about Linda Thomas Greenfield? Some people are saying that she is the deepest in the deep, what do they call it, deep state?
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily would endorse that view. It may be a little bit alarmist, but my concern about her as someone who comes from the Bureau of African Affairs and working in that part of the State Department is that she is a loyalist of Susan Rice. And Susan Rice is someone who we know has been an ardent supporter of interventionism. Almost every modern war in the last 10 to 15 years is one that she has backed herself. I am concerned about Linda Thomas Greenfield. She's going to be potentially the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
This is what announced. She's going to be U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
Yeah, to the UN. And so that removes her from some of the stuff that maybe she would have had more influence on. But I do think it's worth noting that she backed a policy in the African continent known as the Millennium Challenge account that was supported by President George W. Bush's administration, which is a way to basically allow for colonialism in those countries and to enable the corporations, U.S. corporations, to get a foothold in those countries and extract and exploit those countries' resources. So that is, to me, a negative factor. And then I'd add in the fact that she's been such a supporter of Susan Rice, even when she's received very well-founded criticism.
Danny, what about the National Security Advisor, Jack Sullivan? What do you think?
Well, I have been following Jake Sullivan for quite some time. In a sense, I think that he's kind of the dark horse candidate for one of the worst, one of the most disturbing for me. And let me explain. First of all, he was the one. Everyone else got the job essentially they were predicted to get. For the most part, the group that Max Boot, the unrelenting neocon, called Biden's A-team about 7 or 8 months ago in a column in the Washington Post, every one of those jobs has pretty much panned out. But up until the 11th hour, Jake Sullivan was just listed that he's going to get a senior position, very senior position, maybe on the National Security Council, maybe somewhere else, right? He's fairly young. I think in some ways he's jumped up into the express lane more than anybody else. If you read what he writes, whether it's at WikiLeaks or in Foreign Affairs, and if you follow his public statements, this guy strikes me as a combination of an ambitious climber, right? Which is always a little frightening, okay? Especially when things get put to the side like principles. And then also unrelenting in his notion of an expeditionary and interventionist American exceptionalism. He wrote a piece not too long ago, about a year ago, saying, don't ditch American exceptionalism, reclaim it, right, from Trump. And he said that he would support an increase in funding for, say, Saudi security, right, against legitimate threats. He said he understands why the Obama administration supported the war in Yemen. He still won't totally apologize for that. He says he still hasn't decided. All of this is in print, by the way, and it's in my articles recently. He said he still hasn't decided if Libya was a good idea or not. He can't decide. Let us know when you find out, Jake. But the problem is, you'll be the national security advisor, the leader of the free world. This is a strange choice Not surprising, but he worries me. Everything he says, everything he writes is probably on the furthest talk show. And last point on this, Ben Rhodes, and the ultimate Obama internal guy, right? He said that when it came to decisions within the administration, nobody was more leaning towards military might than Jake Sullivan. That's his friend Ben Rhodes who said that.
So, Professor Zunes, do you agree that he is going to be the hawkish in the Situation Room?
It appears so. I mean, that's a very concerning piece, because in many ways the NSC has more influence on the president than any other body, even more so than the State Department or Defense Department. I mean, he is the person who sees the president every single day. He is the person who does the daily intelligence briefings. I mean, he's always the guy in the room, even if it's a very small group that are making some of these critical decisions. And so I would agree that this is probably the single most disturbing of Biden's appointments so far.
Well, so in terms of choosing his team, probably you will agree that Biden was very predictable. He's going to go in this direction, and he's gone in that direction, right?
I would agree that I think that all of the predictions for the last year, I mean, it's incredible how far out people were predicting what a Biden team would look like. I mean, since Bernie's campaign in 1 week became kind of like a dead campaign walking, there's been speculation about who he'd pick. And for a mainstream media that can't get a story right, even when it's fed to them by the CIA, maybe that's part of the problem. They have been remarkably consistent. I mean, I have not seen the media this correct. So the sources were dead on. And it's clear this team was kind of groomed. They were a shadow government working at CNAS and West Exec Consulting Advisors and CSIS. This is where they were. And they were sitting there in a shadow cabinet and waiting. And I'll tell you, the fact that they were so right tells us a little something about terms that I think get misused, but about terms like insiders and deep state.
Yeah. And let me emphasize that while this reflects sort of return to the status quo ante, the American people do not want that. I mean, just for one example, a sizable majority of Americans, including over 80% of Democrats, believe that aid to Israel should be conditional. They believe the military budget should be reduced substantially. They believe we should have zero arms transfers to dictatorial regimes. I mean, if you go down the list, the American public, not just Democrats, but the American public as a whole, is far more moderate than the folks that Biden is appointing. And the trouble is the way the mainstream U.S. media covers things. If there's a debate on foreign policy, or almost any policy, it's the opposition party's view and the incumbent administration's view. So you'll have these far-right Republicans who are controlled by the far right now, who'll be doing all these kind of outlandish statements about what the U.S. should do in terms of in its foreign policies, and the left argument is going to be the Biden people, and ignoring the majority of public opinion, including those of us who are academics, who actually know the countries in questions and know the impact of these policies on these countries. I mean, we're going to be the ones who are ignored, and the spectrum of debate is going to be depressingly narrow.
Well, Kevin, what do you think? I mean, the public opinion, get manufactured, right? I mean, America was against Iraq war, remember, before it became in support of war. And, public. So, Kevin, what do you think about the, are American public opinions, as told to us by surveys, in the absence of anybody running with that as their agenda, has any value in terms of policy making?
Yeah, I think that's why I just want to take a moment to focus on these organizations where these people are coming out of. I mean, for one, West Exec Advisors is a highly secretive firm, and Politico just ran a pretty good report that focuses on how, because of the way they've organized themselves, they don't have to register as lobbyists or foreign agents of any government. So we really don't know the kind of work that West exec advisors, this is where Tony Blinken and potentially if Michelle Flournoy is appointed to be the Secretary of Defense, this is where they came out of the work they've been doing. We also have at least 3 or 4 people in the orbit of Joe Biden that come from the Albright-Stonebridge group, which is Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State, and this is the firm that she founded, and that's an opaque group as well. Linda Thomas Greenfield was working for that firm. And, I still have a lot of question about how people associate with Madeleine Albright when, she's a pretty hawkish figure, and she's notorious and well known. A lot of people among our circles typically reference her quote from 60 Minutes when she told Leslie Stahl that if 500,000 children died from sanctions, as Leslie Stahl put to her, that then the price was worth it, that it was worth it to kill that many people in Iraq in order to fight for regime change against Saddam Hussein. The Center for New American Security and CSIS and these think tanks where people are coming from are funded by weapons manufacturers. They get money from Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin. They get money from fossil fuel companies like BP and Chevron. They get money from the big banks. And so you look at the policy and you see that the way the world is organized, the most pressing threat to me isn't coming from the great powers that we're told we have to oppose in a Russia or China, but it's coming from the collective threat we all face from this climate emergency that is staring us down. And yet you see the people who are being brought on board are the most implicated in this. And that, to me, is the existential crisis to everyone from all demographics. And yet these people at these think tanks who promote these ideologies that support, whether you want to call it neoconservatism or whether you want to call it responsibility to protect and dress it up as humanitarian interventionism, these are the people who are waiting there. I mean, it's been pointed out, I'll conclude here, it's been pointed out that many of the people brought on board are linked to supporting the Iraq War, and also you can find people who were supporters of the CIA torture program. And I think that is hugely alarming.
You're watching Muslim Network TV, and we're talking about the possible Biden foreign policy and the people he has appointed for the Situation Room. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. We're talking about the possibilities of war in the Biden administration and possible foreign policies. So we agreed that there may not be possibility of a large-scale devastating war, but existing war and low simmering wars may continue. So what do you think going to happen to the drone warfare and targeted killing? There's not much known. 35% Muslims in America voted for Trump. And I asked some of them, and some of them voted for him because they believe that he has reduced those simmering warfare, but at the same time, the reporting about his drone attacks had been withheld. So what do you see the state of that? Do you think their negotiation and withdrawal from Afghanistan and Iraq will continue, or it will be reinforced, more troops there, the longer? What are your views on that, Danny? I mean, you have been teaching at West Point and have served yourself. What are your thoughts on it?
I think that precisely what we're going to see is a continuation of war as abstraction for the American people. And that's not just because there isn't a draft. It's because one formula for forever war. We found out that the all-volunteer force can be stretched to its breaking point and continue. We found that out in the Iraq surge. I was rooting for the all-volunteer force to fall apart, frankly. I was okay with that if it would end the Iraq war. But what we found out is that when you pivot, right, after we bend but we didn't break, then what we did was we went to this abstraction, and it's tech-heavy, and it uses a lot of twisted language. It stretches language to its breaking point on things like what is a combat troop. If you listen to a lot of Democratic administrations in particular, right, like an Obama administration, potentially a Biden administration, if you look at who he has on, in his prospects or in his appointments, they use language like even special forces aren't necessarily combat troops. Like raids, they don't count those as boots on the ground. And then this other language they like is advised and assist, A&A, right? Advise and assist. And they're not combat troops either. Now, of course, they die just like combat troops occasionally, and they kill or enable killing as well as combat troops because they hold these little computer screens that call airstrikes, and then they also advise these local forces. In many cases, these local forces are highly corrupt, war criminals, and only tenuously connected to the government itself. In many cases, it's like Afghan local police. You're looking at warlords and militias. You go down into Africa. We talked about the UN ambassador appointment. Right, we talked about where she's come from, and in Africa, I mean, they've sowed more crisis than they've ever solved, and so I think we're going to see a lot of this. And if I could bring up one last appointment that we haven't mentioned yet, and I won't go into too much depth on her. My backup, right, my number two, my contender for the dark horse hawk in the administration, we're not talking enough about, is Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, who was very involved in the drone warfare program. There's some debate about whether she tamped down, and made sure there was a little more legality behind it, but she was certainly considered by some, especially on the left, who are skeptical of her as like sort of this drone queen, But what we do know about her is that she was supportive of Gina Haspel's appointment as CIA director, despite her being directly, complicit in torture. She supported that. She made sure after that, Netflix or Amazon Prime movie, The Report, after that CIA torture report that came out of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, she made sure that no one was held accountable. She hasn't apologized for that. She says, I was persuaded that we shouldn't have held any of the agents accountable, that it wouldn't have been good for morale, and it wasn't the right thing to do. She said that publicly, and she said it with like dead voice. I mean, just cold, and so I think she's my second one. I can go into a lot more detail on her, but she's an archetype too. If you look at her background, she's the archetypal Biden pick, and she worries me just as she's my number two after Sullivan, for who we're not paying enough attention to in the media.
So do you think, Professor Zunes, that the drone warfare will continue during Biden era?
I'm afraid so. I mean, under Obama, who was elected, I mean, he became the Democratic nominee and thus became the president because he emphasized that he opposed the Iraq War, whereas Hillary Clinton, his primary rival, supported it. Though he essentially became president as an anti-war candidate. Under his presidency, we ended up bombing 7 Muslim countries at one time or another, and I believe under Biden, bringing in a lot of the same people, especially more hawkish people. I mean, Biden, at least under Obama, you had some fairly moderate voices. You had some non-interventionist voices. I mean, he had a pretty wide range of people within his foreign policy team. The scary thing about Biden is he's of the Obama veterans, he's bringing in all the hawks and hardly any of the doves so far. And so I'm afraid we will see increased or at least now continued drone warfare. The one positive thing I would mention is that, and this is why I believe some of the American Muslims who voted for Trump were very wrong here, is that more Muslim civilians died under Trump because he loosened the rules of engagement. Of when and under these drone attacks and other missile and airstrikes by the United States would take place. Trump was, well, let's take the gloves off the military, and who love to bomb. I mean, let's face it. I think the positive thing is that, though tragically, I think these drone strikes will continue. They'll be a little more cautious, a little more conservative, a little more targeted. Again, that doesn't mean that a lot of innocent people aren't going to die anyway. but I think it'll be less so than we saw under Trump.
So President-elect Biden says that he, within first 100 years, he will call a summit for democracy. Is it the launch of some type of a new Cold War, or does really, I'm not quite sure whether America has ever been sincere about human rights and democracies around the world. It was always subjected to national interest or whatever, however it could be defined. So what that summit looks like.
I think you're on target here. Ever since I was a teen, I railed back in the early 1970s. I would rail against the hypocrisy of the United States by claiming that we support freedom and democracy, while supporting some of these brutal dictatorships and occupation armies and the like. The advantage I think we have with the Democratic president, though, is that their constituents tend to be more concerned about human rights. And because Biden has put up a higher standard, saying we will not cozy up to dictators, and we're getting away, that we are more about values and not just these narrow transactionalist things. The Trump administration, the rhetoric that Biden has put out, though phony, I would think, I think it was safe to say, nevertheless, kind of makes it provides an opening. Both for more constrained voices within the administration, within Congress, but also for the American people to more effectively challenge the tendency by Biden's more hawkish appointees to continue this kind of policies of supporting human rights abusers.
One of the major challenges, I'm trying to think what that democracy summit looked like. I mean, India is one of the largest democracies, so-called, and Hitler is one of the most popular author at this moment over there, being taught in his schools. You can find Hitler tea shops and the people who are controlling against the low-caste people, Muslims, Christians, passing laws are taking away. The guy, Modi Prime Minister himself, was banned in being in America for 10 years because of his role in massacres. So what that democracy summit looks like, I have difficulty visualizing that. So Kevin, if you are one of the organizers of that summit, what you gonna do?
Yeah, I have a particular difficulty in believing the sincerity of anyone who preaches these values. And I don't want to go back over anything that's already been said, but we have seen the list of people who are providing national security briefings to Joe Biden. And I just would like to take a moment to quickly mention a couple individuals who are troubling. This goes back to the conversation we had about drones. Bill McRaven is providing a national security briefing, and he's a big proponent of the sort of warfare that Danny has been talking about. And then you see General Stanley McChrystal is actually involved in the national security briefing. And I see Danny shaking his head. That's the kind of reaction that I had when I saw his name. Stanley McChrystal is someone who was enamored with the kind of ideology promoted by Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. He ingratiated himself to those folks. He believed, he convinced himself that a caliphate was forming, that there needed to be a sort of crusade and a mobilization to stop, kind of Muslim spread of dominance through the world. And he believed in that kind of force that needed to be used. And he became the person who commanded Joint Special Operations Command. And he oversaw a torture prison in Iraq called Camp Nama that was riddled with all kinds of abuses and torture that even the CIA general counsel who visited said, we're not doing this to people, and was baffled and aghast at what he was seeing. You can read about this. I really encourage you. I think we all are going to need to revisit some of the literature from the Obama era. I've been refamiliarizing myself with Jeremy Scahill's exceptional work, Dirty Wars, which documents General Stanley McChrystal and Admiral Bill McRaven and the kind of warfare that they support. What I'll say about Bill McRaven, well, first off, General McChrystal denied that anything had happened in this facility in his memoir. And of course, he was also implicated in the death of Pat Tillman and the cover-up of Pat Tillman, former NFL player. General Bill McRaven is someone who called for the strike on Al-Majala in Yemen, which resulted in 41 civilians dying, 22 of them being women and children, I believe. And there's a lot of eyewitness accounting in Jeremy Scahill's book from people going to the scene and seeing just goats and sheep and people strewn about on the ground and not being able to recognize anything in the carnage. That was a total disaster, really kind of a mark of the beginning of Obama's drone program, so to speak. And yet there's been no reckoning with it. And that's Bill McRaven. These are two people who are providing briefings to Joe Biden.
Danny, what do you think? Do you think that this democracy summit, which he wants to do in first 100 years, is somehow going to be a cornerstone of pushing China back? And will he President Biden going to bring back TPP and those type of elements in South China Sea?
Unfortunately, I've been saying for a long time, I've been, boy who cries wolfing, except I think I've been right every time, that my biggest fear in a democratic transition, and I didn't want to see Trump reelected, my biggest fear is that they start believing their rhetoric, or feel obliged to follow through on it. So if everything was about Russia for 4 years, and if everything was about out-toughing, like you had an election this year where both sides were trying to out-hawk each other on China. This scares me. Right. And then if you look at Michelle Flournoy in Foreign Affairs, her article, everyone should read it. It's recent and it's about how to handle China. And she says we have to make sure that we give the Pentagon what they need to be able to sink the entire Chinese fleet in 72 hours. She wrote that with a straight face. It wasn't The Onion. It was Foreign Affairs. So this does concern me on a number of levels. I fear that this democracy summit is just another word for creating this idea of we're going to pull India, for example, and other countries out of their non-aligned tradition, their non-aligned movement during the Cold War, which is dead, right? Which is dead. India is not that anymore. And we're going to use the world's largest democracy as a balancer, right? It's going to balance China. So it's going to be couched in democratic rhetoric, but what it really is geopolitics. And of course, I'm working on a piece right now that's tentatively titled India, Balancer or Basket Case. And I think you can guess that I'm going to tack more towards the right, because as you mentioned, this is a flawed at best democracy, if you can even call it that. And we're dealing with a Hindu chauvinist government that is tacking further and further right. All of this is highly concerning. I do have to say about McChrystal, this is someone we need to pay attention to. The JSOC team of McChrystal, McRaven, right? They both have MC starting their name, and they both come from the JSOC snake oil salesman group. And what's the snake oil they were selling us? Counterinsurgency can solve everything. Over-promising, under-delivering, using polite and urbane language that really covers the dark side of coin, which is that it's highly bloody, it takes forever, and it always ends with a dead Yemeni baby. And they don't tell you that. They don't talk about it. And our media focused on the personality cosmetic. Oh, McChrystal eats 1 meal a day, and he runs 10 miles from Brooklyn to the Council of Foreign Relations. What a grand fellow. But if you look at the record and you just scratch a little bit on the veneer, you find Pat Tillman, you find torture prisons, you find drone strikes. And I think we have to reject this. And I'm afraid that Biden is going to be influenced by the personality of these guys, which is captivating and charismatic.
I want to end up with you, Professor Zunes, for you to reflect. I mean, we just got a couple of minutes. I'd like you to reflect on all the progressives and, Sanderites and AOCs and a big platform within Democratic Party. A whole lot of people support the inhumane treatment and the Palestinian rights. What do you see? What role these people will be able to play in the Biden administration when it comes to foreign policy warfare?
I'm afraid they won't have any role in the Biden administration, but I do think that there can be influence. I think that indeed, if you look at every single shift in U.S. foreign policy to the better, getting out of Vietnam, accepting the Central America peace plan, getting serious about nuclear arms control, finally placing sanctions on apartheid South Africa, ending the support for the Indonesian occupation of East Timor, getting us mostly out of Iraq. I mean, you go down the list, it was not enlightened figures within an administration, but it was the American people pressing it and getting progressive members of Congress, sometimes belatedly, to come along and do so. And so I really do think we can do so again. There's no issue at all where there's a greater gap between the American people and the incoming Biden or the outgoing Trump administration than in the area of foreign policy. My main concern, though, is that due to the COVID pandemic, due to the economic collapse here in this country that has exacerbated the huge inequality in America, and of course environmental concerns, and particularly around climate change. That's where almost all the energy is going to go, and as a result, it may enable the Biden people to get away with a far more hawkish, militaristic, interventionist foreign policy than they might otherwise have. And that's why I think it's really good and important that people like yourselves and more independent media have allowed for opportunities for people like us to raise these concerns and to raise awareness in the hopes that we can indeed mobilize the American people to take an active role on foreign policy issues and to minimize the damage that the Biden administration may do.
Well, at this time, we need to conclude, but I must say that when Trump took office, women were marching immediately there. So January 22nd, peace movement and anti-war people are planning major mobilization throughout the country. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Zunes, Danny Sjursen, and Kevin Gosztola. Thank you so much for being with us. I truly appreciate you. And I appreciate all of you who are watching here. And thank you, Sherdil Khan and Dr. Abdul Wahid, for producing today's show. You're watching Muslim Network TV. We are on Galaxy 19 satellite, which covers whole North America, and a stream on Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. And you can download our app, Muslim Network TV, on for Android or iPhone. Thank you so much. Peace. Salam.